Tina, how's your week been?
Well, I actually did have Maduro exit on my bingo card and set it in December on our webcast to clients. And so with that in mind, my week has been intense because I was one of the few people who saw this coming, although not the timing. And I did think he would go for a more cushy exile, Maduro.
Okay, I think probably he might have wanted that option as well. Not quite sure whether a New York jail is his ideal travel destination. How about you, Nina? What have you been doing?
I can barely remember it because every time I wake up at the weekend, I find myself on air talking about some other change of regime, usually that the United States is involved in. I've spent the last few days obviously talking about Venezuela. When that happened, just a couple of days after the new year, I was down in deepest Devon at a friend's place, sort of hoping to be cut off from world events. And, with the events in the Swiss mountain fire, I covered that quite extensively over the first couple of days of January, then Venezuela, now potentially Greenland, Iran, you name it. It's almost, there's no point in taking any time off or going to sleep these days because you wake up and the world order's changed the next morning.
Well, you might miss something transformational.
Yeah. And then it will have been surpassed by something else. This is something that you learn, that we all learn very, very quickly. We have a long list, don't we, of very bad things that have happened. I'm being absolutely as simple as we possibly can, but when you start to say what's happened this week, you have to say, well, we've got to talk about Greenland, we've got to talk about Iran, we've got to talk about Venezuela. And everything is happening at such speed. Tina, you've been taking furious notes since we've been on air. This is imparting clearly some wisdom about what's happening. What's been the big thing that struck you this week?
That the world is on the cusp of another wave of transformational change. Whether or not we like the means or the motives, the idea that Venezuela, which has been under a brutal regime for decades and has 30 million people, and possibly Iran, which is a much bigger country with over 70 million people, may rejoin the free world in some fashion, is simply staggering. I mean, I have been focused on revolutions and geopolitical change for 30 years. And it was the 1989 revolutions that got my career started. I went to live in Russia, a former Soviet Union. I lived in Azerbaijan, which borders Iran. You have 25% of the Iranian population is Azeri. And I am transfixed by what is happening. Of course, the path after this will be very bumpy, nonlinear, and everything else. But it's important to understand 100 million people may be about to rejoin the world.
It's an interesting fact that you came in and saying we're at the point of transformational change globally. And looking at the New York Times, it's responding that as well. There is this recognition, isn't there? It's headline today. The world is in chaos. What comes next? What they've done is they've gone to 5 writers whose worlds who are sort of taking new directions for the world, and the consensus is the world we know is ending. Something new has begun. Now we've seen headlines like this before. We've seen transformational change being mentioned before. Why is it different today?
Well, I have written a thesis on the Geopolitics Supercycle. I wrote it 3 years ago, and we actually did some empirical data collection that talked about the fact that you have more drivers linked to geopolitical change and weaker guardrails. And that's leading to more risk events. And as I say, this process started and gained momentum some years ago. What's happening now is more opportunism, and you could call that with Donald Trump opportunism, this extraction operation, which was bold by any stretch of the imagination. But what's happening in Iran is really different. And I think it's important to understand, I've called this Vox Populi risk, and I started writing about it after the Arab Spring and then the right-wing populism in Europe. We do have waves and cycles of, sort of concentrated people power. And so what happens next in Iran, whether or not the United States decides to undertake some kind of operation to further undermine the regime, such as the nuclear facilities or military facilities, it's not necessarily clear that that would bring about the desired result, because these kinds of transitions are really impossible to direct from the top down. And I do think that's lost in our conspiracy theory, low trust laden kind of lens. This has happened before. It will happen again. And nothing happens from out of left field. There are actually very few black swan events. Iranians have been trying to overthrow this regime in earnest for some time, and they've been brutally repressed every time. The reports are possibly a couple of thousand protesters murdered. What happens next is not predetermined.
It is several hundred in the last 3 days by all accounts, and there are reports coming out of hospitals in Iran saying that they are absolutely overwhelmed. Nina, your take on this idea that the black swan events are incredibly rare, and we could have seen all of this coming. I think from the outside, if you just look at it superficially, the initial reaction was when Donald Trump got into power last year, is he broke the American system from the inside. He sort of reworked the government. Now he's set about doing that to the rest of the world.
Yes, that's right. I think, look, when the onset of the Ukraine war happened, it's now heading into its 4th year next month. Most people clever sort of thinkers sat around and thought, is this another 1930s moment? Is it a pre-World War II moment? Then Donald Trump got back into power last year and everybody thought, is this a pre-World War I moment, perhaps? Well, actually, it turns out that it's the dawn of a new age, get it? It's the new Monroe Doctrine, as Donald Trump has said. It's the Donroe Doctrine, and essentially what he's doing is he's bringing America back to a position of 1823, when, of course, James Monroe more or less said, look, we're a nascent country, but Europe, get out of our backyard, particularly Latin America. And you could argue, and Tim Marshall's written about this very eloquently, who, of course, wrote Prisoners of Geography and various other books in that franchise, today in the Sunday Times, where he's more or less saying, what we're seeing here is a power struggle that's akin to the fading British Empire at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, and a rising Germany. And the rising Germany would be China in Donald Trump's book. So essentially, we've got two great superpowers, and Donald Trump wants to use this dynamic to gain access to all of the resources that he needs to fund his high-tech economy. And when it comes to allies, you're either on his side or you're on China's side. But you can bet he's going to do what he can, not just to get hold of those resources that he needs for his country, but to also make sure that China doesn't get its hands on them or on any geography as well.
Tina, this is all about resources, isn't it? That, you look at what happened in Venezuela and you wonder, well, was regime change really at the top of Trump's list? Perhaps not, but the oil resources were clearly something that would bolster American coffers while their own supplies dwindle. But this Tim Marshall article is talking about a race for rare earth minerals will actually define the 21st century. I mean, we're only a quarter of a way through it already.
I mean, listen, it's not 1973. The U.S. now has energy independence and has had for some time. So I think it is a mischaracterization to say that what happened in Venezuela was strictly about oil. I certainly don't want to be, defending or explaining the logic of this administration, but I think the Tim Marshall argument and what Nina said is correct. It is about positioning the United States for dominance. And this is where the people who got kind of comfortable in some sloppy thinking about a tripartite world, I think, are wrong. It isn't just about the Southern Hemisphere. It isn't just about Trump kind of misunderstanding the size of Greenland because he looks at a Mercator map. It is about edging out China, and Russia looks incredibly weak after this. And, I think the United States has bitten off more than it can chew in many ways, having, demolished USAID and hollowed out the U.S. State Department, where lots of qualified people, the people of my generation who did the democracy building around the world are now gone. They may not want to do nation building somewhere like Venezuela, but if they want to see those energy majors who gathered in a room in the White House on Friday ever think about going back, having been burnt badly in Venezuela, you're going to have governance and institutions and not starving people on the streets and the jails full of political prisoners.
There's an article in the Spectator this weekend. The former UK ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, has said that in Caracas, Donald Trump did more in a day than orthodox diplomacy was able to achieve in the past decade. And going in and breaking stuff, I think we've mentioned here on Monocle Radio, the Pottery Barn principle.
Yes,
but what Mandelson is trying to highlight is that Europe has found itself geopolitically increasingly impotent in all this in the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing being a disruptor, but the real problem here is that the United States has sold Europe and the rest of the world a post-war construct since the end of the Second World War that encouraged other countries to buy into exactly those democratic systems and nation-building systems that US action has left in its wake that Tina was talking about. And the real problem here is that when you're talking about regime change in Venezuela in a sort of, let's face it, rather cack-handed fashion, you're not seeing any acknowledgement for international rules and laws. And at the same time, you've got a domestic struggle with Donald Trump's own people back in America playing out with what happened in Minnesota and the ICE agents shooting at a US citizen over there who lost her life. So you've got the spectre of other countries here in Europe writing, is America on the brink of civil war? Is it going to export wars that it's not really going to manage very well to other parts of the world? And it's a massive crisis moment for Europe that, of course, is many different disparate states that are held together in this sort of really uncomfortable political allegiance that's supposed to bring and secure peace. But now that whole union and the ethos of it that America helped create is now a question.
And we have to look to Greenland at this point, don't we? Because we have what geographically it's sort of more towards the United States, but so much part of the European project that when you look at the way that Donald Trump speaks about Greenland in the same way that Tyler might talk about going for a haircut, that idea of I can just nip in and pick up a country or I can pick up a region. This is, again, really challenging the European way of doing things.
Yes, and the impotence and the flailing about of the response is alarming. Donald Trump has said that he doesn't need international law. And of course, the European Union, its entire raison d'etre has been peace through bureaucracy. And so the lack of even a vocabulary for a response is striking. Having said that, Europe has had a lot of time and has been talking about Trump-proofing itself. Since Trump 1.0, it hasn't happened. The ECB president, Christine Lagarde, has been talking about Europe needing to find its geopolitical power. Despite all of this, I am quite bullish on Europe's prospects because we are incredibly rich and safe, and we need to marshal our competitiveness, and we also need to rise to challenges. I often cite a Harvard Business Review study that talks about zeitgeist leadership. This paper was from 15 years ago, but it talks about how the best CEOs are those who manage through the times, the zeitgeist. Well, European leaders need to adjust to manage through the times as well. I don't think that Donald Trump needs to militarily invade and annex Greenland because there is so much scope for a different type of agreement. But we're not hearing that from European leaders.
You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Joining me in the studio, Tina Fordham and Nina dos Santos. And we have an editorial handbrake turn now as we head to Ljubljana, where Monocle's Ljubljana correspondent, our man in the Balkans, is on an ice rink. Good morning, Guy.
Good morning, Emma, and good morning, everybody. I've actually just stepped away from the ice rink because The Weeknd was playing a bit too loudly on the ice rink for anybody to actually hear what I was saying. But, small mercies. They often have some dreadful Balkan stuff playing. So, The Weeknd's a big improvement on that.
Don't say that too loudly because you live listening. You live in that neck of the woods. So I would be polite about all cultural input.
I'm never polite about bad music, Emma.
I know that. I've spoken to you about that extensively, but not on the radio. Right. Why are you at an ice rink? I mean, are we now sort of like incorporating Monocle radio hits with babysitting duties, or what's going on?
Well, do you know, when Desi was talking about doing this weekend, my initial idea was I was going to be on the ski slopes at Karvavets, which is just outside Ljubljana, so it's our nearest mountain, in effect. But to be honest, Emma, the weather didn't look great, so I chickened out of doing a Monocle on Sunday at Karvavets, and I thought, okay, ice rink's a nice second best option. So here I am, avoiding the grommets taking me out, because there are two major dangers at the ice rink in Ljubljana. One is the very small children who skate right in front of you with zero warning whatsoever. And the other one is middle-aged men trying to relive their heyday as ice hockey players by doing extraordinary manoeuvres in front of you.
Which are more dangerous?
You know, could go either way. Obviously, if the middle-aged men fall on top of you, that's not great, because let's put it this way, they're not at their fighting weights, to put it mildly. But the grommets, they can just take you away from the knees, and that's it. And when you're adult height, you're going down.
Brilliant. Okay, are you an ice skater?
I skate recreationally, and I'm okay. I mean, the last piece to camera I did for the BBC from Zagreb Advent, I actually did on skates and managed not to fall over while doing quite a few takes of it. So I'm decent, but I'm not sort of, scraped to a stop in front of you, sending up a shower of shaved ice. So I'm not quite at that level, I'm afraid.
So you're just
pirouettes are out of the question, Emma.
Oh, that's such a shame, but you are showing off nonetheless. Well done. Thank you, Guy. I'm just asking Nina and Tina. Love saying that so much. Nina and Tina, are you ice skaters? I'm a zero, and no, not a damned chance will you get me doing that.
As a child, I was brought up doing all my grades and ice skating. My twin sister was much better than me, actually, so I eventually ended up giving up in my early teens.
Were you one of those grommets?
I love figure skating, yeah.
Were you one of those grommets that took out Guy, or were we doing the proper pirouettes?
No, I was doing the pirouettes.
Wow.
Over in Queensway.
Nina
W2.
Nina overachiever. This is wonderful. Did you actually compete?
No, at the end of the day, no. But as I said, that's the difficulty with being a twin, almost identical twin. One of you ends up being a lot better than the other one at one thing or the other, and, the other one ends up giving up. I gave up. Eventually, so did she. But, I suppose that's osteoporosis, kicking in.
Glorious. How about you, Tina? Are you an ice skater?
You actually asking about my childhood athletics. I come from Northern California, where ice skating isn't really the done thing. But I also was a girl in the 1970s when soccer fever really hit, and we had a lot of kind of aging European and even Pele football players coming around. And so I was the first wave of girls playing soccer, which, as you know, is not the done thing in Britain, but it was brilliant. So that was my brush with sporting prowess, being a really good defender.
Two sporty souls here in London. Guy, tell us what else is happening. You are actually ostensibly on the radio to tell us what's happening where you are. So tell us, what's happening where you are?
Well, I thought, because I was originally going to do skiing this weekend, I thought I would tell you where you can actually ski on a World Cup ski course for free, absolutely zero dosh whatsoever, because this is, as we all know, skiing can be quite an expensive activity. But if you go to Croatia, and specifically if you go to Sljeme, it's within the city boundaries of Zagreb, the capital, you can actually ski for free. And the season opened literally yesterday. And you can go up Sljeme on the cable car, which was renovated very expensively. We covered that in Monocle a couple of years ago. And the course for the last couple of years has been free, and somehow this had passed me by. But this year I've clocked the article saying, you can go and ski on Sljeme. It will cost you nothing. There is one catch, however. It says it's free for Croatian citizens. And I just wonder how hard they're going to be checking. If you're opening everything for free, and thereby, you're not going to have the ski passes, you're not going to have the staff selling, and so on and so forth. Are you really going to bother checking everybody's really from around there? Is it a local ski slope for local people? This is what I'm wondering, and I may have to go and check it out.
You may have to check it out, and wondering where you hide your ID and your salopettes.
Well, quite so. I mean, normally, when I'm doing my skiing, I don't have one of those ski jackets with the slot for your ski pass in them, but it works quite well from putting it in my hip pocket, and I do a little it's like the time warp. Do a little jump to the left, and that seems to activate the gates on the ski lifts.
Amazing. The pictures you're painting for us today, Guy, are spectacular. Wonderful. Right, let's talk about, look, we're talking about hospitality, tourism, leisure here, and Croatia. Tell us a little bit more about the fact that Croatia really was a wonderful place to go a few years ago when just post-COVID it was opening up and they were desperate to get the industry and the market open. And then in the last couple of months and years, people have said, actually, if you do go to Croatia now, there's scant space for anybody to actually enjoy themselves. Croatia's tourism is growing.
It is indeed, and the figures are just in for 2025. So the end of last week, these figures came out. 110 million overnight stays last year in Croatia. And it reflects the fact that tourism makes up more than a fifth of the GDP in Croatia. And the problem is, though, that all of that tourism really is concentrated in July and August, and it's concentrated in a few places. I mean, when you look at where they're going, it's primarily the Istrian coast, then what's known as Split Dalmatia County, which takes in Split and Dubrovnik, a couple of other coastal areas as well. So you're seeing that a few areas are getting all of these tens of millions of tourists in a very short space of time. And that's the issue for them. And the reason I was looking at Zagreb Advent again this year was it's one of the efforts that they're trying to do to spread the tourism bounty out, not just over the year, but also to different places. Because when you look at the locations which are getting the most tourists, Zagreb, for example, is conspicuous by its absence. So they're aware that moving people around would be good if people want to continue to have a good experience in Croatia when they come on holiday.
Tina, you want to come in?
Well, so I spent my summer holiday in neighboring Montenegro, which is highly recommended, much less visited, has medieval Venetian architecture because it was part of the Venetian Republic, and altogether delightful, and still with that incredibly turquoise, clear Adriatic Sea. So top tip from me, don't go to Croatia, go to Montenegro.
Guy, are you going to stand up for Croatia now?
I think it depends. Well, I would say don't go in July and August. But if you go in, say, June, September, October, May, it's absolutely beautiful. And again, steer clear of the main tourist traps. If you do go to Dubrovnik in high summer, it is going to be extremely unpleasant, not just crowded, but unbelievably hot. And if you're in a medieval walled city, when the temperatures are pushing 40 degrees, you're going to feel it. So I'd just advise to be sensible. Go to the mountains in Croatia in July and August. That'd be a good idea. Don't go to the Istrian coast. Go up the hills to a town like Motovun, which has got lovely vineyards and truffle hunting at various times of the year, but also has a film festival in the summer every year. And you're up at a little bit of altitude, and that makes all the difference. So I suppose it's not following the herd is the key to having a good experience in Croatia. Montenegro, on the other hand, by the way, Emma, it's definitely benefited from the fact that a lot of Russians aren't going there anymore, so it is a bit quieter than it was.
Speaking of unusual places to go on holiday, there's an article in I think it's in the Sunday Times today, which talks about how, well, this is the idea of over-tourism, but pushing it into different directions. If you are, I don't know, Guy, if you're a viewer of Emily in Paris, it has sadly escaped me, but apparently a nunnery in Rome is becoming the most deliciously attractive place to go. Let's talk about this a little bit in this room. I mean, the idea of Tina, you've done nuns, haven't you?
Well, no, I haven't, but I explored the option, and I can definitely see the appeal of a complete kind of self-isolation and the purity of non-talking, only singing, mental space. And when I looked at it, it was some years ago, and I think they're onto something. Simplicity. And again, a kind of a purity element is very appealing.
Having said that, if you came out a week later, it would feel like the film 28 Days Later, wouldn't it? At the rate the world is going. I used to live in Italy for several years, actually. And I actually studied in Italy in another one of the cities which is famous for pilgrimages. And these institutions that this Times article is talking about, this nunnery that's been made famous by Emily in Paris, now decamping to Rome, there's actually quite a lot of them Fordham across the whole of the country. There's about 3,000 of them. And that makes sense if you think about these sort of being refuges for pilgrims. But the reality is that obviously church attendance is falling around the world. Fewer and fewer people are making their way towards religious sites in Italy. And this is a good way actually for the Catholic Church to, get people back on board and get some money.
It's the way that they're doing it is delicious. They are saying, okay, look, the rates to stay are not so high, and I think there was one nun who said it keeps a wolf from the door, and also it means that monks and nuns can meet the public without having to engage too closely with them. Guy, do you have this where you are at all?
I've done it in Rome actually. So I stayed at Domus Helena in Rome a couple of years ago. Because we were looking at, our son wanted, for his 18th birthday, we said, what do you want? And he didn't want stuff, he wanted a trip. And he said, Rome would be good. So we worked it out and then looked at the hotel prices and we thought, oh gosh, what have we done here? And somebody gave us a tip that you could go to a website called monasterystays.com. And
everyone's writing this down.
Yeah, Monastery Stays. It's a really clunky website, but it lists all of the religious houses in Rome where you can stay, and they are spectacularly located, a lot of them. So, for example, Domus Helena is 10 minutes walk from the Colosseum and about 10 minutes walk from Roma Termini station. So it's about as ideal as you can possibly get, and you're not dealing with the kind of shonky city centre shabby hotels that abound in Rome, or the sort of big international names, a lot of which are quite a long way from the city. You're actually right at the heart of things, and you do find yourself sharing breakfast with nuns, and just depending on the establishment. Domus Helena, honestly, it's more like a Premier Inn with a few nuns wandering the hallways, but some of the others do have a much more religious feel to them, and you can join mass at various times, or prayers in the morning if you want to. If you want that sort of experience of Rome, you can do it. But I thought it was marvellous.
Guy, it sounds as if you're just about to be run over by everybody on the ice rink. We shall leave you there. Guy Delorney in Ljubljana, about to be attacked by a load of children. Thank you so much for joining us. We have 1 minute left. I mean, this idea of being in sort of Domus Helena in Rome sounds rather glorious, but does one have to behave oneself while one is with the nuns, one wonders?
Well, one would hope, but it's not just the monastery stays. Pilgrimage interest has spiked, and actually church attendance is going up. Church of England attendance is falling, but younger people are interested in church attendance, and so the kind of spirituality element, reaction to tech, may that gather momentum.
Nina, we've got 30 seconds.
Well, look, I mean, I think it was wonderful there to have a little detour into something that, has lasted for generations, thousands of years. I've definitely written down monasterystays.com, and I used to live in Rome and I didn't know about that. So, that was a really nice note to end on from this wild world.
From the Park Hyatt in Tokyo to Domus Helena, that was our hour on Monocle on Sunday. Thank you so much to all my guests, Nina dos Santos, Tina Fordham, Tyler Brûlé, Fiona Wilson and Guy Delorney. I hope he survives the ice rink. Thanks to the producers, Mariella Bevan and Desi Bandley, and the